It's time for tennis. It's way too windy. Are you kidding me? Oh man, this is why I wish California had more indoor options. They say it's always so nice outside, but you know, we get plenty of days like this. Geez, look, I have some Italian cypress trees in the background. Look at how much they're bending. Look at that. Ridiculous. This kind of weather, I feel like tournaments should be canceled. People shouldn't be playing tournaments in this kind of weather, right? I'm gonna do a video on that one day, but I do have some stuff to say about why I don't enter tournaments. And this is one of the reasons, because it could totally just end up being on a day like this, and I don't want to play. I'm not trying to play tennis on a day like this. I don't care. You know, it's something everybody has to deal with. It's more so like nobody should have to play tennis in this kind of weather. So anyway, that's another video. Let's talk about why I have both backhands. What's up guys, it's time for tennis. I'm just saying that again in case the audio that I recorded outside was completely trashed due to how windy it is. I'll pause it and turn the camera on just so you guys can see. I want to make sure you guys understand what I'm dealing with here today. Oh yeah, look at that, baby. Sometimes the days I play tennis are the days that I make videos, but today's not one of those days, obviously. You saw what it's like outside. So let's talk about why I have both a one-handed backhand and a two-handed backhand, because it's something I get asked about. But it's a decision that I made a while ago, and I wanted to explain it. So I had a two-handed backhand for quite some time, actually pretty much ever since I was playing tennis, and I think there were times where I was more or less aware of kind of the awkwardness and the difference of it, you know? I mean, it's pretty typical. I think regardless of what level of tennis you're playing, your forehand is generally probably better than your backhand is. And I think on the shots where you really want to murder the point, if you do have enough time, you'll probably run around the ball to hit a forehand, even if a backhand is a little bit more convenient, just because the put away power or something like that might make the shot more manageable or whatnot, right? So I think most people prefer their forehand to their backhand, and I don't think that's really debatable necessarily. I think that's very agreed upon. Now, the reason that I decided to switch from a 2 to a 1, which is something that I did a while ago, I know in my videos now I have both, but there was a time where I started experimenting with the 1, and this was a couple years ago, that I just decided if I'm really gonna develop the one-handed backhand, I need to stick to it. So I just isolated myself to only hitting one-handed backhands anytime it did come to the backhand side. My reason for doing so is because the two-handed backhand, I noticed some plateaus, I would say, but I also just felt like, in some ways, you know, I always maybe wanted a one-handed backhand. It's just I think a lot of two-handed people say that. I know some one-handed people that say that they wish they had a two as well. It's just a classic kind of want what you don't have thing. I think both sides have that a little bit, but you definitely see less of the one-handed backhands, and you know, Federer and whatnot. I think Dimitrov and Gasquet and Wawrinka, they all have such nice looking backhands, and there's just something about it. I really wanted to try it, and just getting your left hand involved. Me as a right-handed person, I felt like my left hand was contributing to some of the limitations and some of the awkwardness of a two-handed backhand. I also felt like you have less mobility, you know? You basically have the combined limitations of the left and the right hand in terms of the mobility. When you just have one arm, right? You can think about, you have all freedom of one arm, but when you have two arms, you have the limited range of both. You don't really have, you have maybe the power of two hands, kind of, if you can get the coordination to work out for you, you sort of do have two hands as opposed to one hand in that way, but people don't maybe consider the mobility difference when you're getting a second hand involved, because it's two hands that have to move as one unit, so you kind of lose the mobility even though you gain some stability compared to having a one-handed backhand. So I just got really tired of those limitations. I got really sick of hitting backhands in a way that I felt like I didn't want to, and I thought that the one was worth exploring. It was something I just wanted to try out, and I enjoyed it. I felt like in the beginning it was coming along really quickly, like, wow, I just started hitting one-handed backhands and they're already this good. So there was a lot of encouragement for me to continue. And that's what I did. And some time went on, several months, maybe even a year, where I started to miss some of the things about a two-handed backhand. And this is exactly kind of what I wanted, right? I feel like this is where people are going to criticize, where, you know, it's like, oh, you just should have always stuck with the two and worked through the awkwardness or whatever. And that's a fair point. But I'm a curious person and I want to try different things. And ultimately my journey regarding a lot of things on this channel is really just about the curiosity and kind of satisfying the curiosity. So Sometimes I do the same thing with my tennis. It's not just equipment-based stuff, but it's technique-based stuff as well. But am I going to go my whole life like never really trying the one-handed backhand? And if I'm not really committing to it for a certain amount of time, am I really trying it at all? So I decided to give it a really good shot, and I feel like I did. So after doing that and missing some of the things about a two-handed backhand, I started to just try the two again for a little bit. And then I decided, a lot of people really pick just one and feel like you have to get really good at one. And I thought, why can't I just get good at having both? Nobody seems to do that. Like, why isn't that perspective a perfectly valid perspective? Instead of getting really good at one, get good at both, but maybe learn which situations call for this or that backhand pretty much, because they both have pros and cons. For me, I didn't like the mobility limitations of the two-handed backhand. And for the one-handed backhand, I started to notice some of the struggles. One of the big struggles of the one-handed backhand, it is nothing to do necessarily with power. I wouldn't say that the raw power is necessarily harder. It's more so the time that you need to generate that power, right? I know a lot of people complain about high backhands. The high backhands was actually one of the reasons I loved one hand. I felt like trying to get two hands up there was a lot harder than just getting one hand up here and kind of slamming it down and rotating into the shot. I've had some really, really just nasty one-handed backhands that I took really high. It was almost like a backwards overhead or something. It was really quite a hard shot, and that was one of the things that early on made me feel like, oh, this is definitely why. This is one of the reasons I switched, right? So it allowed me to be offensive in a situation where I might normally slice. So that was really cool. But one of the main limitations is how much time it takes to set up your shot. And that's a little bit negligible, but there's two factors to this. So one is that the windup, I think, literally does take more time, and that's one factor. The second factor that takes more time is that the contact point is actually further in front of you. So you combine the two things, you have less time to respond to the ball because you have to get it further up, right? So the ball has less distance to travel before it's in your strike zone. I'd say maybe about 1 to 2.5 feet, depending on the shot and depending on how tall you are or whatever, maybe some technique variants too. But I'd say it's about 1 to 2.5 feet of difference in the contact point. And in terms of the time that takes, that can actually add up to be quite significant, whether or not you're a little bit late or a little bit too far in front of the ball. That could be the difference between having to take 1 or 2 whole steps just to be in the right position. And I think the thing that's nice about a two-handed backhand is that it's a lot more like a forehand than a one-handed backhand is like a forehand, because essentially your left arm is kind of the dominant one, and on a forehand the right arm is the dominant one. But on a backhand, if you're a one-hander, the right one is always the dominant one. So when I'm facing this way, then my shoulder is behind me as I'm winding up for the shot, whereas I'm winding up for a one-handed backhand, my shoulder is still in front of me and it's in front of me throughout the contact point, which means that the ball has to be in front of me and my right shoulder, right? So that pushes the contact point way in front of me. Whereas with a two-handed backhand, I can take it kind of here, right? So that's maybe my contact point is more here, but a one-handed backhand, the contact point is more so out here. So that's one of the big differences. So when you put together the combination of having to catch the ball more in front of you, which basically shortens the court for you and rushes you a little bit, on top of it taking a little bit more time to set up, just the rush factor of that shot can be a little bit stressful, especially when you're hitting with heavy hitters and they have a lot of topspin and my forehand is being caught a little bit more behind me, but my backhand is more in front of me. It makes the court feel a little bit asymmetrical in a way, actually, that I don't really appreciate. And during the period where I was really committed to the one-hander, my mindset was kind of like, I have less time, but that also means they have less time. So if I do have the right contact point and everything, and I'm in a good position, not only am I a little bit rushed, but they are too. So it kind of takes time away from both of us. So I felt like, it's harder on me to deal with having less time, but it's not like that doesn't make a difference on their side too. So I didn't feel too bad about that. But there is one more reason that I decided to switch, and I think that this one is more so personal than it is an objective thing. Although that's a little debatable, I suppose. But my third reason, I'm just going to say that those other two reasons were two reasons, was that I felt like my body and the strength of my body and the coordination of my body, it's becoming so right arm dependent. So that was another reason that I wanted to bring the two-handed backhand in. I just felt like my right arm is always the one doing everything. I'm only getting a workout on my right side of the body. Everything about how I plant myself and how I follow through on the shot, it's all coordinated for the right side of my body. And I felt like that was also creating some asymmetry in how I feel coordinated and just the muscle and stuff that I'm building having a one-handed backhand. So I wanted to bring the two back, and I really like the idea of having the pros and cons of both and kind of picking and choosing, but also just trying to sort of resist the idea that you have to have one, and just try for myself to try to have both. And either way, it's like that's what I needed to do to figure out whether or not I prefer one or the other. I really wanted to go into this and get my own perspective on the pros and cons and what's relevant to me. And as someone that does coach a little bit from time to time, I thought it would be worth it to just have a personal experience on the differences between having a one-handed and a two-handed backhand. So what better way than to kind of just have both, you know? Really see for myself what time makes sense for this or that shot, what pros and cons really work in my favor and work against me, and maybe factor into my preferences as a tennis player. That's really ultimately why I decided to have both. So part of it was curiosity, and part of it was just feeling stuck with the plateaus and kind of avoiding getting through the plateaus by, instead of hating the one-handed backhand on this shot, then maybe this is the time for the two-handed backhand. And what would happen a lot for me is that a ball might come a little deeper than I anticipated, and I would very quickly be like, okay, this is time for a two-handed backhand, because without really having to move too much, I'm already in a good position for a two-handed backhand. And whereas if one was more in front of me, or I'm really on the run, sometimes a one-handed backhand just made more sense. I was in a better position naturally. And I would say for the high balls, pretty much every time I prefer the one-handed backhand, but that's not like something I couldn't have gotten over with the two-handed backhand. But a lot of people with the two-handed, they say that you either have to take it later or you have to take it earlier. They kind of don't really talk so much about learning how to take a two-handed backhand high. So yeah, that's my story about why I have two backhands. And I'll say that in a future video, which I plan to make soon, I basically have made a commitment to one of these backhands. And I'm not going to reveal which one now, just for the sake of building a little bit of intrigue. But I also want to give myself a little bit more time to understand the perspective of my decision. I really stuttered on that word, but I'll leave it in there. Yeah, so that's my story about a two-handed and a one-handed backhand. I guess I'll play a little bit of footage of me hitting both. But yeah, I got to explain my point about the difference in contact point and the time that it takes away from you and why that factored into my decisions, and also just some mechanical stuff that made it a little bit more difficult. What are some other things, if I have any final points to say about the one and the two-handed backhand? No, I should say that the one-handed backhand is underrated a little bit. I can see why people think that it's not quite as viable, and you know, definitely there's less people on the tour that have it, but you always have somebody like in the top 10 with a one-handed backhand. You know, it's not like the one-handed backhand is dead, and it's not like it doesn't have its advantages. It certainly does, but I do think it's generally a harder shot. But I do think there are some situations where having a one-handed backhand is a lot nicer to have than a two-handed backhand, but maybe those situations are more rare or difficult to appreciate, if that makes sense, than a simple two-handed might be. So there is that. And there was a point that I saw from another tennis pro. I forget who it was. It was a pretty high-ranking tour player that was interviewed about the one-handed backhand. And he said that he believes that it's a lot easier to disguise the direction of your shot, whether or not you're going to go down the line or cross court. He thinks that that's much easier to disguise with a one-handed backhand. And I would agree. And that's kind of interesting. You have a little bit more mystery in the way that you're going to play. Yeah, well, I guess that's my video on trying to answer the question as to why I have both backhands. And yeah, stay tuned, because I will be doing a video on why I picked the backhand that I picked. And I actually don't really see myself going back on this decision. I think that this, after all the time that I've taken, committing to the one and then kind of having both again for a bit, I think I do really feel closure, I would say, with the decision that I've made to stick with the backhand that I'm going to stick to. So stay tuned and see that video, and stay tuned for some of the content coming out, because I do have a lot of cool products and stuff that I'm going to review. I still have them sitting on the couch over here, so if you saw my last video, you know what I'm talking about. So watch that if you haven't, and please like and subscribe if you want to see more future content. And let me know in the comments what you guys think about the one versus the two-handed backhand. I'm just curious what other people think. Let me know if you ever had a 1 or a 2, or you had both at any point. I think most people that had a one-handed backhand or do have one had a two-handed at first and then maybe switched later if they were one of the tennis players that kind of started developing their tennis at a younger age. I think a lot of people when they're older, they start with 1 because the coordination is a little bit more simple, but that might not be true necessarily. So yeah, let me know. Whatever you guys want to say about the 1 and the 2, I'd love to hear it. I'm just curious what your guys' as my viewers and my subscribers are on the 1 and the two-handed backhand. So leave me some comments and let me know what you guys think. I will see you in a future video. Thank you for watching. Also, don't forget to go to Tier 1's website. If you guys want to use my coupon code to get a discount on these strings, you are certainly welcome to do so. It is Time for Tennis, just like it's spelled on my channel. And these are some strings that I'll be doing more reviews on in the future, but great strings. I wouldn't be mentioning them if I didn't feel that way about them. I got that in my VCORE 95 right now. I have Black Knight in 17 gauge on my VCORE 95, and I'm getting along with it very nicely. And yeah, I just wanted to mention that, and that's all for now. I'll see you in the next one.